Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Justin. I'm here with Rich and your host, Aaron. Fantasy Knuckleballers. We have over 50 years of fantasy baseball experience between the three of us, and we've known each other for a good 5 years or so. And we've decided to bring our love of baseball and fantasy baseball into a format to share our strategies and our insights with all of you. We are new to this, so as we go on, we hope to build bigger and better content. Check us out on our website, fantasyknuckleballers.com. You can reach out to us at Twitter at @fknuckleballers, and then you can email us at mvp@fantasyknuckleballers.com. So I think we want to start off with just some overall draft strategies, some tips, and how in the world do we handle the 2020 year? What do we do with that data? I'll pass it on to Aaron to start off with those talking about those things.
Thanks, Justin. I'm really excited about the show. I'm hoping that the audience is as happy about it and as we are. So anyhow, we put together a list of draft tips for your average roto 5x5 league. And it's really helped us in our leagues, and I'm sure it will definitely help you going forward. The first rule that we put together was understanding your league. This is really kind of a basic tip here, and a lot of sites just do this as lip service, but really understanding how your league works is your first step. You can't really do anything else until you understand that. For instance, what's the trading policy like? What kind of waivers are going on? Is it a weekly waivers? Is it a free-for-all? Just understanding that really goes a long way to helping you with your league. And understanding the scoring. Most 5x5 leagues are pretty standard, but some kind of substitute wins for quality starts, or you have leagues where there's an on-base percentage factor. There could even be a 6x6 league of a little run on that. Some leagues check holds. So understanding those rules is really key to understanding that.
Yeah, and one of the other things I think people seem to maybe ignore when they're joining a new league are, the number of bench spots. So make sure you understand the depth, because I can't tell you how many times I've been in a league and somebody ends up getting upset because they can't add X player because they thought they had, 3 bench spots when they only have 2, and those sorts of things. And also, if you're in a league with minor league rosters or involving minor leaguers, make sure you understand those processes as far as, when you have to activate the minor leaguers and how many spots you have in those sort of things.
A real big issue. You got to know if your league is open to trading, or is the group one that's really active, loves to trade, or is it a group where you're going to pretty much have to draft your team and there might only be 1 or 2 trades during the year that really affects your strategy going into the draft and what you're going to do during the year. If I'm in a league that's going to have a lot of trading, then I'm drafting the best player. I might draft 10 straight hitters and then go for pitching. It changes your strategy a little bit.
Absolutely. And another thing, in addition to bench spots, there's the injured spots. A lot of leagues might have a injured reserve spot, or may have 2 of them. So that's really key during the draft. Then you may not want to take a chance on a player coming back from Tommy John's or somebody that might miss the first 2 weeks. So those players might fall a lot more. If you have those spots, then you can take a risk on a Noah Syndergaard, for instance, that's coming back mid-year. So just understanding that what Rich and Justin said was really great.
Yeah, so that's definitely phase one, understanding the league rules, and make sure you understand those before you join. So the next thing is once you have a league that you've joined, how do you approach that? How do you approach a draft strategy, and what's the approach here? So for number two here, I'm going to focus on rotisserie. Joining a roto league, what you want to do is you want to try to get what your target categories are, what your target numbers are for each category. So step one to that would be, obviously understanding what the 5 categories are. So if we're talking a 5x5, for hitters, we're talking hits, RBIs, home runs, runs, and stolen bases. That's your standard. And then, for pitching, you're talking strikeouts, wins, saves, ERA, and WHIP. Again, those are just the kind of the standard base, standard 5x5. So when drafting for roto, what you need to do is you need to have a target number that you're aiming for in each category, a target total number. So for those of you new to rotisserie, or maybe this is your first time playing, you're not going to have those numbers, right? So you weren't in the league before. Typically, what I would do is, for whichever league in question, I would take the first and second place numbers from each category from the previous year.
No, I agree, Justin. I think that's a great strategy. What I try to do is I set a target. I might have a target of 350 home runs. I might have a target of 140 stolen bases. And then after we started the draft, and maybe I picked 5 hitters, I'm a little light on home runs, or I'm a little light on stolen bases. It helps me adjust my thinking in the draft and pick players to help me meet those targets.
Right. Aaron, got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if you at least target to be in second or third place in each category, that should give you at least 70 to 80 points. And for most 5x5 leagues, that will get you enough. That should be enough points to put you there at the end to be competing for the league championship. So if you at least target to be in the second or third in each category, you'll do pretty well. And it's really important not to punt a category. I know a lot of people get in a draft and get frustrated. The player that you've been targeting for several rounds just got picked, and you might just say, heck with it, and just I don't need a stolen base or a closer. I'll just make do without, or I'll never try to punt a category, at least in the draft. You may end up doing it later, but it's not a play you want to do going into the draft.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. I see a lot of people pushing that strategy, and like punting saves is always a popular theme out there. And I've seen people say that they've won by doing that, but I've never seen the numbers. And in the leagues that I'm in, if you punt a category, you're not winning. I mean, I've seen 10 player leagues where the winning team has 90 plus points almost consistently every year. So you punt wins and you punt saves, you're not winning the league.
We'll post recommended stat totals on our site within the next week or so. So go ahead and be looking at our site, and we'll post those target numbers for you.
Number 3 is pocket aces. It's a new strategy. I know last year a lot of people had a lot of success targeting pitching aces in the first round, second round, third round, and fourth round, and the goal is to get 2 aces. So if you're in a mixed league, 5x5 league, you want to get, there's say 15 aces out there, you want to get 2 of the top 15 starting pitchers. So you're going to be taking pitching early, and then you're going to be loading up on hittings, and then reaching back for pitching back in the middle rounds in 13th, 14th round. But there's been a lot of success recently. It's a new strategy that I'm going to try out this year to see if it works for me. But it really allows you to get a heads up on those key categories like strikeouts. Really helps you with your ratios when you look at WHIP and ERA, and then allows you to maybe take a little longer approach on taking starting pitchers later. Once you get past about the 10th round with starting pitching, your boom or bust is probably 50% or less when you take a pitcher at that round. So really what you're trying to do is take the pitchers that have been successful year in and year out and ride those pitchers to help you with your ratios, and then load up on pitching or load up on hitting later.
That's a really good point. I've seen a lot of different strategies that intrigued me. Having that stud in your pitching staff allows you to wait for your backup pitchers, for your secondary and your 4, 5, and 6 pitchers. So yeah, I absolutely agree with Rich with this one.
It's an interesting strategy for sure. It's not one that I've ever employed. And in fact, I'm kind of historically I've been the opposite, where I like to target hitters early and go for pitching late. The problem there is the further you go down the list in pitching, the more difficult it is to find somebody who will accrue, for the 5 categories, excluding saves. I'm strictly talking about, starting pitchers here. Because you can find guys late with good ratios. And those are, as the season goes on, if you're falling behind in your ratios, it's a lot harder to make up ground versus the non-ratio categories. Like if you're falling behind in runs, it's easy to trade for a guy that can give you a lot of runs and add to the total. But for your ratios, because they're a ratio stat, it's a lot harder to make up the ground. And when you get deep into the draft, it's hard. It's almost impossible to find somebody who's going to help you across the board in pitching. So you might find your guys who are low ERA, low WHIP, but they're going to be very low on strikeouts as well, and probably very low on wins. And the exact opposite is true. You can find a high strikeout guy low, but his WHIP and ERA is going to go through the roof, and it's really going to hurt you. So loading up on pocket aces, it's a good strategy, and it can really alleviate your pain later on the draft and give you more freedom.
All right, the next tip for you is understanding the player plateau, and it's not obvious from the description there what I mean by that. But in every player's career, the performance of a player plateaus, and like in the early ages of between like 21, 22, 25, and 26, the player is going up, usually in their performance on the ball field. Once they get to the age about 28, 29, and 30, their performance levels out at the highest peak it will be in their career. And then starting, that's why a lot of teams and a lot of analysts really start factoring in their age after they get past the year 30. That's when the player's performance will steadily start to decrease. Normally, you have guys like Scherzer, Nelson Cruz, for instance, that seem to be still crushing the ball at 40. You'll have that, and more power to them. Like, that is fantastic. But for the most part, by and large, players' performance starts going down after the age of 30. So when you start ranking your players, when you start predicting their stats for the year, take in their age when you start doing that. So what I usually do is I'll look for a player that has that's usually in the. I usually really target players 30 and under. Players that are around 26 or so, 27, that has had a steady improvement in their stats from year to year, and then they're going into their age 26 or 27 or potentially even 28 year. I usually look for a big increase in their performance. That's usually like one of my telltale signs that the player is going to break out this year, or at least there is a strong there's a strong probability that they're going to break out. So that I usually take that into consideration. But like I said, there's always the Nelly Cruz of the world and Scherzer, um, and even Verlander is like still dealing at his age.
Yeah, I think the age 28 thing is typically more applicable to hitters. And overall, as far as strategy goes, I think it's much more prevalent if you are in a keeper league or in a dynasty league. If you're in a one and done league, I wouldn't put too much into the age, especially if you're confident in the projections you're using. I know we haven't talked about projections and all at all, and um, but if you're confident, you've got good projections. That's pretty much something that I don't consider at all, especially for a one and done. But talking more about pitchers here, it's the paradigm seems to be shifting because there are several pitchers in there above age 30 that are still doing extremely well. It's almost becoming the norm from a pitching aspect. But you're right; it's a known thing for the hitters, and that the 28 seems to be the magic number there. And it definitely is something to consider if you're drafting in a dynasty league or if you have a keeper league.
I looked at hitters. We play in an NL only league, and I looked at hitters that were age 33, 34. And if you look at the top 50 hitters every year, and I went back like 4 or 5 years, and there's a big drop off when you hit about age 34. You start seeing declining. I mean, starting with age 30, 31, 32, but then you see a huge drop off. There's very few hitters that are really good after age 34. Now, with pitching, I agree totally with you, Justin. I think pitching pitchers seem to last a little bit longer. They seem to hold their velocity. And a lot of times you'll see pitchers holding out to 36, 37 and performing well. But with hitters, you can look in just the recent past. Joey Votto is a great one. He was a fantasy stud, and then had a huge drop off, especially with power and batting average. So while they still maintain some skills, you do see a big decline.
Absolutely.
One of my new strategies, I was trying to think of something new, is taking players that were affected by COVID in 2020. So that means I'm looking for players that were hurt, players that were opted out in 2020, and also players that took a step back in 2020 versus 2019 or 2018 and had previous good performance. So I'm looking for players that are dropping in the draft from previous years. And if you do that, you can really find some values. A couple players that opted out that I think are great values. You have Eduardo Rodriguez out of Boston. He's going the 65th starting pitcher overall at 228. He's a great value, offers strikeouts, good ratios. I think David Price is another pitcher, the 51st starting pitcher off the board, that really can give you like your number 3 pitcher off the board or your number 3 pitcher on your fantasy team. I think there's several players that have dropped just based on their 2020 performance that I think are going to rebound. For me, I've got Anthony Rizzo, Paul Goldschmidt, Max Muncy, Matt Olson, Nolan Arenado. He was a first round draft pick in 2019, 2018, 2017, and now he's going in round 3. He's only turning 30 this year. He's still playing in Coors Field until somebody was willing to take that big contract. He's a 40 homer guy, 120 runs, 120 RBIs, 300 batting average. Getting that in the third round can help you win your league. I mean, there are other players. You got Nolan Arenado, you got Tommy Pham, you've got Kyle Schwarberger. You've got closers that didn't perform well. I look at Will Smith in Atlanta. He got COVID. He never really performed well in 2019 or 2020. I'm looking for him to rebound in 2021. There's no one else there in Atlanta to close. He's going late in drafts. When you look at Jordan Hicks, He opted out because he's diabetic. He throws 101, 102 for the Cardinals. Nobody's talking about him right now. He's going 200 to 300. But I really think the COVID strategy is one that can work. What do y'all think?
Yeah, it's a good time to bring this topic up because a lot of one of the main topics of conversation among fantasy baseball this year is how do we handle the 2020 season? What do we do with those stats? Do we take them at face value? Do we discount them? Is it a player by player basis? And for me, it's player by player basis, looking at their overall longevity, looking at what happened last year and how they were affected. Rich, to your point, it's important to note because there are several players who were just absolutely on a tear last year, and then they got hit with COVID and they came back and they weren't near the player they were. I believe Austin Meadows is one of those, and so for me with 2020, it's a player by player basis. I'm just in my rankings. I'm just looking at it holistically, and then trying to make some sense about all of it and figure out what to do with each player.
As for me, I think everybody's going to be a little bit different, but I'm one of those unfortunate people that had Christian Yelich last year, and I did win a championship with him, but it wasn't because of him. And having him last year totally sucked the entire season, and you couldn't take him out of your lineup because he was Christian Yelich and he was a first round or a keeper in almost every single league. So you couldn't do anything with him other than just write him out. And it was the end of the year, and I think at the last couple weeks of the season, I finally just threw up my hands and okay, you're coming out of my lineup. If you're like me, you're going to hold a grudge against Christian Yelich, which may be good for everybody else. It's not saying I'm not going to take Christian Yelich in this year, but I'm definitely dropping him down several pegs. Take him with a grain of salt, but I wouldn't necessarily totally discount him. But like what Rich's original main point was about, don't forget about those guys who opted out, like Jordan Hicks and David Price and others. They're going to be dropped in a lot of different drafts, and it's behooves you to go out there and find them, and you don't overlook them as well. It's a very good point.
Yeah, the good thing about last year is we're all in the same boat. No one really knows how to handle the stats, so it's not like somebody's out there that has the key.
The next topic we wanted to cover was pitching consistency, and we've kind of touched on that. As you know, like fantasy baseball, there's kind of a separate set of categories for pitching and a separate set for hitting. The way the players behave from year to year really depends whether they're a pitcher or hitter. Hitters are a lot more consistent from year to year. You will see very little deviation from a player's stats year over year. And like I said, I talked about that player plateau. It's very clearly defined with most hitters. You'll have outliers here and there, but for the most part, hitters are very, very consistent. They follow that plateau. Pitching, on the other hand, for the most part, that's the reason why most people draft hitters early, is because of that consistency. They can guarantee that a Cody Bellinger or a Mookie Betts is going to go out and get them a certain number of home runs, a certain number of stolen bases, and feel pretty comfortable at the end of the draft. However, the number of pitchers that go out and totally bomb or blow up from year to year really changes from player to player.
Yeah, I think as far as pitching consistency, I think pitchers overall have a better avenue of being able to come up with something to adapt to a loss. For example, a lot of times we'll see starting pitchers lose velocity later on, and if they don't come up with a way to adapt to that, then they're going to bomb. But the great pitchers, we see them take on new pitches and learn new pitches, or change their secondary and third pitches and lean on them more. And if they can do that well, then they can maintain a high level of success.
Absolutely.
Yeah, pitching strategy. Pitching is tough. I know it's something that I've struggled with trying to pick the right pitchers. But I think one of the things that pitchers can do that hitters can't do is pitcher's velocity changes from year to year. A pitcher can gain 2 or 3 miles per hour on their fastball, and they go from draft pick 500 to now they're a top 100 player. And the same thing with they might develop a new pitch. All of a sudden, they go from changing their pitch mix where they're throwing their curveball from 10% to 40%. Now they're everybody's darling, and they're a top 30 pitcher. So I think pitching, there's a lot more volatility, and there's there is that opportunity to find those diamonds where they're not even drafted. Next thing you know, everybody loves them and they're on everybody's roster this year.
Yeah, like I found a couple for examples. Like I tell you, the perfect example of what I'm talking about is Trevor Bauer. He was last year's Cy Young. The year before that, he was actually having a really good year in Cleveland before he was traded to Cincinnati, and then he went into the tank after that. In 2018, he was a Cy Young candidate. 2017, he was not, and that's been his career. And he is not alone in this. Like I said, just the consistency there with pitchers is not there, which is why those few pitchers like Max Scherzer, like Garrett Cole, like
Jacob deGrom.
Thank you very much. They are so valuable. Those are great examples of those pocket aces you were referring to, Rich, because they're consistent. And finding consistency as in a pitching is key. And if you can do that, they're worth the high draft pick.
Yeah, so going on to the next one, player tiers. So this is kind of more of a secondary strategy. Earlier we touched on for rotisserie leagues, knowing your target number for each category. And that's kind of step one. From there, there's many other things you can do strategy-wise. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to tier my players based on a given weight of how much they're going to help me, not only in each category, but across the board. And, how many positions they might be worth. And doing this, it allows me a better picture, but coming up with a tier based off a solid set of criteria will allow you to kind of see what's out there, what's going to be out there during your next pick or your next 2 or 3 picks versus what's on the board right now and what categories you need. So that's kind of just a secondary strategy to go along with knowing your target numbers.
I like to know who is the last player at that position that I feel comfortable starting. Like for me at third base is Chris Bryant. I want to get a guy in the first 120 picks. I really love the guys earlier like Nolan Arenado. I love Rafael Devers, Alex Bregman. If it falls, then I want to make sure that I at least get Chris Bryant. So I might reach a round or two early to get him. He's the last one I feel comfortable with. At shortstop, I love a lot of the new ones. And if I can get some of the guys with the power speed early, I'll do that. But if not, Didi Gregorius is great. He's going to hit me 25 bombs, score 80 runs, 80 RBIs with a good batting average and chip in a few steals. And I can get him super late, like pick 180.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially there's not many of these leagues out there that I'm aware of. But if you're in a league that doesn't have utility or doesn't have like a corner infielder or a corner outfielder, and it's basically just a one-off for each position, then that's crucial. The strategy you just mentioned for the infield, because with the outfield you're going to play 3 of them, and there's a much bigger pool of players. As far as those infield positions, if you don't have those utility spots or those corner spots, then they're going to go fast. And if you're stuck with one of those guys outside of what you're calling the last guy like to start, then it's going to cost you.
Yeah, and kind of go back to that point there, especially if you're drafting at the end of a round or at the beginning of a round, and you're trying to decide between two or three different players. Can we really predict who's going to be better than between Arenado and Jose Ramirez? Can we say for definite that one's going to have a better year than the other? Probably not. But having them both in that same tier, you may say, okay, well, both of those third basemen plus another one or two third basemen are in that top tier for me. I can wait on third base and maybe go ahead and draft a shortstop or a first baseman that I like here much better. So that's usually how I use tiers, and it's really paid off for me.
Okay, so let's talk about closers. I'll start off by saying, the whole closer philosophy has changed drastically in the last few years, mainly because there are so many teams that do not have a dedicated closer, and that was not the case 5-10 years ago. Every team, for the most part, had a dedicated closer, and you knew, barring injury, and barring a horrible performance throughout the year, that if you drafted that guy, you were going to get saves. The whole paradigm has shifted, and there are so many teams that do not have a set closer. They use these closer by committees, loyalty either. Just because a team names somebody a closer, there's in years past they were more likely to stick with that guy through rough times. In today's game, guys are being pulled left and right. So let's kick it off with that, and just how the closer philosophy has changed over the course of the years. And Rich, what's your closer philosophy? Obviously, it probably changes per draft, per year, but do you have a main point you stick with?
Yeah, I mean, mainly I hold on closers. I don't try to draft a top closer. I'm not trying to draft two closers. I maybe try to pick a closer that's solid, and then I maybe pair him with somebody that's in a lead backup role, like Drew Pomerantz last year, or maybe Gio the Cardinals. And then another thing I do look at doing is, if I'm waiting on closer, I might pick somebody like Will Smith. And if I know the Atlanta team real well and I feel comfortable who's going to have that backup closer role, then I might combo pick him, so I at least have one closer. I have been hurt in the draft by waiting and then not getting any closers, especially in the NL only. That can hurt you. So I don't say just punt it completely. And in a 12 team where the pool is a little bit deeper, you can wait longer. But I'm not a big fan of going up and getting closer early. But I do think.
So when I first started playing yearly fantasy baseball back in 2016, the first closer was based on how many teams were in the league. The first closer wasn't coming off the board until the fourth or fifth round. And because of the closer landscape in the last few years, now we're seeing closers go in the first round. And we're seeing several closers go in the first few rounds. So I have a handful of closers I like, and I will target them early if I have to. Guys like Edwin Diaz for New York, and Josh Hader for the Brewers. Those guys where they're pretty safe picks. They're going to get you a lot of strikeouts. They're going to have lower ERA and low WHIP, and they're they're going to get saves. Hader, Diaz this year more than Hader. I think he's projected. He's probably going to have 10 more saves than Hader, because we're really not sure what the Brewers are going to do yet. But you're right. If I don't get one of those top guys, I'm waiting. I'm definitely waiting, because this same landscape shift also gives us more options later in the draft and during the season. Throughout the season, we see all kinds of closer changes, and there's going to be guys that end up in closing spots throughout the year on the waiver wire that you're going to be able to pick up to make some gains in your save category.
I think pitchers that relief pitchers that just have great ratios. I mean, I think of Devin Williams. He was a free agent pickup last year, and he performed great for me.
Yeah, guys like Blake Trinan, but you're right. If you need help with ratios and even strikeouts, there's guys there's non-closers that can be had. They're going to be out there at the end of your draft. So based on how your draft is going, always don't eliminate a relief pitcher just because he's not a closer, because A, they can still help you, and B, a lot of times those are the guys that end up filling those closer spots when the current closer struggles. And let's talk about steals. What are your thoughts on steals, and how do you approach those?
Well, early in the draft, I try to take guys that have power and have stolen base potential, or have stolen bases. I mean, I'm looking for guys that can do both, especially in the first couple of rounds. For me, I want to get at least one baseline guy. I'm not big on getting a guy that's just all steals, and we're going to talk about him later, like Alberto Mondesi. I like somebody that can do other things as well, like a Trey Turner. I'm good with guys that are Ronald Acuna. I like Francisco Lindor. I like guys that can give me chip-in steals that maybe go late, like a Tommy Pham, that can maybe give 20-20. So my approach is I do want to have some steals. I'm not looking necessarily to finish first. I'm definitely not punting and trying to finish in the bottom third.
Yeah, so steals to me is kind of the same category as saves. It's one of those where, as time moves on, the current trend is that they're harder and harder to come by. There's just people just aren't stealing like they were 10 years ago, and managers aren't calling for stolen bases like they were. So it is definitely a topic of discussion of what to do with steals. I myself, I don't ever go out of the way to try to fill steals. I probably won't take a guy just to give me steals unless it's late in the draft. A good example of that is Billy Hamilton. We saw him overdrafted for years, and there's just no way I'm drafting a guy like that who's not going to help me in any category except for steals, unless he's available at the end of the draft. But that being said, there's a lot of guys that that can be had early in the draft that are 4 or 5 tool players that can help across the board. And it changes a lot of people's draft strategies because they know they're going to be hard to come by later. So they might target those guys with the big steals more than guys that, will help them across the board in other categories. So Aaron, I see you're back, man. What are your thoughts on steals?
So steals is a very interesting thing. Punt those categories. You can't really punt those categories. To me, stolen bases are much, much more valuable than home runs. I did some research on this, and back in 2019, granted it was kind of a juice ball or year, almost 6,800 home runs hit in that year. In 2019, that same year, there was only 2,380 stolen bases that year, almost 3 times more stolen home runs than there were stolen bases. So that makes stolen bases that much more valuable.
I would say they're more rare. I definitely wouldn't say they're more valuable. For me, when you're looking at home runs, you have a direct correlation to runs and RBIs. So a high home run guy is essentially going to help you in 3 categories. A high stolen base guy is going to help you in 1. So
not necessarily, because those high stolen base guys. This good conversation here, but a high stolen base guy will also get you more likely to give you more runs, because there is a correlation between runs and stolen bases. Yes, obviously with a home run you will score a run as well, and you'll score an RBI. They're more likely to get you higher RBIs, but they still get you runs. So it's more than just one category. So it's 2 versus. A speed guy will get you 2 categories versus the 3 categories that a home run guy will get you.
Yeah, you make a point. I'd say for your run correlation, it's also going to depend on those around him. If you're on Baltimore this year, I wouldn't really correlate stolen bases with runs too much. Rich, what are your thoughts?
The key is playing time, and if they have a good batting tool to go along with those stolen bases, I think they can produce runs. But I think if you're drafting, say, in the middle rounds, and you're taking a guy that's going to have 2 home runs and some stolen bases, you're probably losing out a little bit on the other categories. and you're going to fall behind. So that's why I go for more balanced players early in the draft to help balance that out. So I'm not having to reach for somebody late to give me stolen bases.
And that make a good point. That's why Acuna and Yelich are so valuable. Mookie Betts. That's why they're in the first round, because they give you both that stolen base and home run threat. They're really great players to build around.
Good thoughts there from everybody. Let's talk about the next one, back end strategies. So I know we all talked about this before. There are a lot of podcasts out there. There are a lot of websites that are going to give you, information on who the top guys are, right? And I think I think we're all in agreement that you're not going to go wrong in the first round unless you totally blow it. Anybody you pick there is going to help your team. Where most leagues are going to be won are in the middle and in the background. So let's talk about the back end strategies. But before we do that, I just want to mention to the listeners that we are working on a different approach here. We're talking about maybe doing a draft, a reverse draft, and that way we can put emphasis on who we like in the later rounds. We'll have more on that later, but for now, let's talk about the back end strategies and what do you guys do? Do you have a strategy? Obviously, we've said it 100 times that strategies they change throughout the draft, but do you have a general back end strategy of guys you look for? Or?
Aaron, I think you won our league last year based on picking players off the free agent market, and then also late in the draft that help you win.
Like to do it ties back to your player rankings. It's really important that you come up with your own player rankings. Look for those guys, those sleepers. In future podcasts, we'll give you our sleepers for 2021. Take some of these tips that we gave you and come up with some of your own sleepers. And so what I like to do is if there's, let's say, 15 rounds in a draft, the first 7 or 8 rounds are going to be your core guys that are going to give you balance, going to give you categories. But then, I usually have a list of between 5 and 8 sleepers that I like, or at least guys that's going to be drafted in the second half of the draft that I want to make sure I get on my team, either because, they're going to help me in stolen bases or another category, or they're a guy that maybe was hurt last year and expected to come back, or he's had a really good spring and showed some really good ball skills. He's going to have some playing time. And actually, that's one of the big keys there is look for those guys that actually have playing time coming up, because they can have all the ability in the world, but if they don't have that playing time, then you're going to win with that player. So if they're a new guy, if they're new to a position, they have that position locked up, then that might be some of those guys that you target. But then, like I said, in the back half of the draft, I usually try to target those guys. Okay, if I want as many of these sleepers on my team as I can get, how do I organize it so that I can get the majority of those players? And knowing your team, knowing your other owners' tendencies will help in this, but that might grow over time. In my opinion, you can't really overpay for a player you think is going to do really well. You might take him a round or two too early, but like I said, if I get the guy that I want, then I didn't take the guy too early, because you never know how many other people are out there that's going to try to pounce on that same guy, and you'll be kicking yourself all year long if he falls into another owner's team.
Rich, what are some of your strategies?
Well, I like to look at the back end of the draft, and it helps me positions I can wait on and not have to pick early. But then also, I think you can win your league late in the draft. I mean, think about if you picked up Corbin Burns, Dom Smith last year. Late, they were free. I'll even throw out, a guy that's not sexy but gets a lot of playing time, like Aaron was talking about, Brandon Belt. He was very productive last year. If you look at his fantasy value, I believe he was top 50 player. But I love to look late to find players. I'm looking at playing time. I'm also looking at rookies that can come up. I mean, this year we've got like Nate Lowe. We've got Jared Wash. or Walsh out in Anaheim. So there's lots of late value picks that can really overperform. I like to lead the league in at bats. I think if I can lead the league at bats, I have a great chance with home runs, runs, RBIs. But I definitely love the late part of the draft, and I definitely spend a lot of time looking at those players late to try to find value.
Yeah, you make a good point there about at bats. I know in the league that us three are in together, every year, the person who has the most at bats is in the top 3 of hitting category. So it is often something that's overlooked. But back in strategy for me, I always look for, consistency. Especially guys coming through the minors. Have they done the thing they're doing? Have they done it? Have they been consistent at it? And I'm also looking at guys that can really explode in a category. I'm looking more for high ceiling guys than I am high floor guys back there, because if you have a guy that can, come through and get you 20 stolen bases that was unexpected, then that's the kind of stuff that can win your league. That's kind of my strategy. I love the back end of the draft because I think the majority of leagues are won in the mid to late rounds. And if you're in a league with minor leaguers, it's really important to know, to have some basic knowledge on the minor leaguers and what their potential is for at bats this year. Like Rich and Aaron already said, it's so important to know if they're going to get at bats or not. I'll give you a good example. Look at the Josh Bell trade coming to Pittsburgh. That leaves Colin Moran at first, who really struggles against, I think, left-handed hitting. And they have some really good prospect first baseman in their minor leaguers. So what's Pittsburgh going to do? Are they going to give those guys a chance this year? We don't know, but we know that door is open to injuries. If you have a guy at a position that's always injured, and there's an opportunity there for somebody else to fill in this year, those are just kind of some of the things to look out for.
Absolutely agree. We do actually have a bonus tip for you. We were doing a top 10 and we decided, why stop at 10? Let's go ahead and do 11. And that's predicting runs and dealing with runs. That's within a draft. So if you don't know what a run is, if you've been in any type of draft, is where a particular either skill set or position, usually position, starts getting drafted. And in most leagues that I've seen, typical runs usually go for closers. Closers is a very frequent run in most drafts. So it's important to understand and deal with runs. We'll use the closer run. The league that we're frequently talking about, our NL only league, there's always a run of closers around rounds 3, 4, and 5. And so it's just a matter of understanding when that run is going to be, at least bracing for it and being good with it. So what a lot of owners fail to do is, when a run starts, the first 2 people take a closer, and then the third one takes a closer, and then maybe the 5th one takes a closer, and coming up, and all the top 2 or 3 tiers of closers are gone. Do you take the next best closer who might be sharing closing jobs with another person or two? Like, for instance, do you take Archie Bradley now that he's in Philadelphia? He has Neris there. Is he going to be splitting time? Or do you go and do something else? Philosophy is to take the best person available. It may not be Archie Bradley, but it might be another hitter. It may be a stolen base guy. It might be a pitcher. Don't let the runs influence your draft. Because when you do that, so if there was already 5 or 6 closers taken when it got to you, don't take a 4th or 5th tier closer that might be splitting time. Take the best player. If it's a starting pitcher, whatever the case may be true to your rankings and take the best player available. That way, if you do that, you're not falling for these runs, and you're drafting the best team out there. You may have to do stuff later in the draft to get that closer, or get you some saves, but you're not sacrificing your team overall because there may be trades, there may be waiver pickups or what have you that will help you later in the year.
That's a great point, Aaron. I mean, you said it perfectly. I mean, I did it a couple years ago. I mean, they announced Archie Bradley has been the closer for the Diamondbacks. Everybody had taken a closer. I needed to take one. I was getting nervous that I wasn't going to get one. I grabbed Archie Bradley. What did the Diamondbacks do? I can't even remember who they ended up putting in the closer role, but it wasn't Archie Bradley. So, I mean, that's a great point.
It might have been Fernando Rodney that year.
It was.
Yeah. So for me, I don't think you can really predict runs. I don't try to do it. For me, it's all about preparation. If you put in your due diligence, and we talked earlier about knowing your target, rotisserie. I'm speaking specifically on rotisserie here. Knowing your target number for each category, having using some of the other strategies that we talked about. Having them tiered. Rich mentioned, knowing which guy is the lowest guy you can play at each position. I think if the more prepared you are, the more likely you're going to the less likely you will be to make a mistake and hop on a run when you shouldn't. And I think that's typically the case in the drafts that I've seen. Usually the people that are, jumping on these runs when they shouldn't be are when you look at a move, like question, like, why did that person take that? Usually those teams are kind of at the bottom of the pile by the end of the year. So I think it's all about preparation.
Absolutely.